Okay, so we finally have major changes for Mythic Plus in 11.1 and the faith has been restored.
Wow, that dude got one-shotted, man. How the fuck? Holy balls. Holy shit.
In the void.
There is actually a looming question mark over this entire statement because the video we wanted to do on the topic and the video we ended up doing are not the same. What am I talking about? Earlier this week, we have had a major blue post from the dev team about the state of Mythic Plus in Season 2, and prior to that, Ian Azakostis was interviewed by PC Gamer with the prominent topic discussed being the lack of fun in Mythic Plus. Ian essentially recognized there is a problem with Mythic Plus design when players don't find it fun because we don't. Following that, the blue post doubles down on some of the best news we have heard about Mythic Plus in probably a year. So let's see why there is hope for Season 2 to be maybe the best season of Mythic Plus so far. Mythic Plus in the War Within has many issues, at least in our humble opinion. The issues would be the reward system, the depletion system, the tank situation, the healer situation, the many casts that can only be stopped by interrupt, the crazy amount of mechanics for each pack, and the meta specs problem. There might be more, but these are issues that only started to crop up in the last season, with some burying their fangs earlier, like the meta revolving around Augmentation Evoker. If you have been out of the loop in the last few months, know that a few of these have been fixed, which already saw big improvements for Mythic Plus now, and a few big ones announced for Season 2 that made everyone excited and some still left with question marks for the future. What has been resolved has been partially the reward system, where we actually get a decent amount of crests for a dungeon run, whether it is timed or not. This ties into a more deeper psychological problem. The dungeons being hard is not inherently bad, but having drastically lower rewards only served to exacerbate the issue. People are willing to put up with a lot of shit so long as they are getting paid for it. Outside quite a few buffs and nerfs to specs that would look towards solving some meta issues, that's all we've got so far, with Season 2 bringing the real changes. Supposedly. First thing that you may have heard about to compound with the tuning changes was that augmentation can no longer buff tanks and healers. This is a big change to bring Aug in line with other specs, where it can offer more DPS focused benefits to a party, it occupying a DPS role and all, instead of just more abstract benefits like survivability, utility, dispels and such. Condensing the value of the spec to bring DPS output benefits can make it easier to be weighed against other DPS specs as a DPS spec instead of a very unique spec that essentially boosts the survivability of tanks, something no other spec can do, and provide additional crucial dispels to curses, poisons, diseases, and bleeds, something only evokers can do. But due to the nature of augmentation, you would be an unironical fool to consider taking any other evoker spec, just to name a few. It's too early to tell if this will turn Aug from a locked-in spot, no matter what the party composition is, to just another DPS spec. But it's definitely a step in the right direction for the moment. The second best thing was the announcement of tank busters being tuned down, where now we delve deeper into the tank situation. Tanks are at this point the rarest and hardest role to fill within a group. Although this can differ from person to person, for me it's the lack of fun and rewarding gameplay that is the result of too many punishing mechanics for my group that I cannot do anything about, which normally stop me from pulling large packs, but also the incredible brutal damage intake I have from seemingly random mobs, with tank busters being in almost every other pack. I am a self-proclaimed tank enthusiast, and by that I mean I normally end up tanking in keys more than any other role, and this expansion has been the first time in 20 years of World of Warcraft when I genuinely disliked tanking for all the reasons stated above, coupled with very little changes, improvements, or reworks done to the tank specs to keep up with modern WoW combat and class design. Are you telling me Arcane Mage got about 3 reworks in beta, 2 major talent and playstyle changes during the first 2 months of the patch, and another one announced for patch 11.1, and the tanks got fewer changes between the whole lot of them in the last few years? Well, guess what then? I'm not tanking anymore. And who cares what I'm doing? Well, you might, because I'm not the only tank that stopped playing, since clearly these issues are not isolated to only one individual, hence why we can never seem to find tanks, because unsurprisingly, not everyone wants to play a prot paladin. Tank bossers being nerfed and relegated to rare and specific mobs is definitely a good thing, but it has to be followed by more. The third major change coming next season affects the prot paladin problem, the melee meta class, and honestly a lot more, since this ties into most of the issues in the current season. The pacing of combat will be slowed down to allow people to better coordinate for mechanics. This was approached from the perspective of casting spells of mobs, which once prot paladin in almost every group for the amount of interrupts that it can do, and also melee DPS for the faster interrupt cooldowns that they have. The general cast time of dangerous spells has been increased first of all. This will give people more time to respond and have a kick ready. Longer cast times also means overall fewer casts, since they numerically occupy a larger portion of the dungeon timer. Secondly, they, and I quote, removed, simplified, or slowed the casts of others. Spells, I assume. This is a big step, especially if you think of a generic pack in a dungeon that currently has 2 to 3 spells it cycles through, one usually being the big thing that will kill the group, the other being a debuff of some sorts, and the third being the filler bolt that, god damn it, seems to always do so much damage. Because casts can only be stopped by interrupts, you will save interrupts usually for the big dangerous casts and attempt to delay the rest of them with stuns and other forms of CCs, which ends up putting the entire group's utility kit on cooldown every pack. This has been a bit too much, too involved, and too exhausting. The change is good, and similar to the tank one, still a bit incomplete. However, if we end up with fewer casts overall, maybe we won't need them to be interrupted by stuns and knockbacks anymore. And to showcase these good changes, you can watch the new dungeon they released that we also covered in a video the other day. Operation Floodgate has significantly fewer casts to stop, and maybe it's just me, but there are more mobs that can be crowd controlled to potentially stop other casts as well. A usual 1 to 2 pack pools in Floodgate has about 2 mechanics you want to account for, like the architect pools that have the nailed root mechanic they spam, while another mob fires a fire beam that chases you and leaves puddles on the ground. Outside of these are just regular auto attacks and dynamite casts that the healer has to heal through, leaving the 8 mob pool to have 4 mechanics between the lot of them. That averages at about 1 mechanic for 2 mobs. Compare this to only 1 pack in Grimbatol, where the giant has a big tank buster and a heavy AoE burst that ideally people use defensives for, and 3 beguilers that each have a channeled stun on a player and a shadow bolt or shadow flame bolt cast that chunks 30 to 40% of a player's HP in one go that they continuously cast until you interrupt them, giving you a 3 seconds breathing window if you end up doing it. That's 4 mobs with 8 mechanics, averaging at 2 mechanics per mob. So that's essentially 4 times more things you need to do to safely approach the pack. You might not think this is much, but it will add up over the course of a dungeon, and I'm not even going to go into the Warlock, Enforcers, and Ascended Shaman packs that followed this deeper into the dungeon. I'm all for a challenge, but if Season 1 proved anything is that more isn't better, and more can be challenging but also very exhausting to the point where players might just be that, exhausted. So they end up quitting and leaving us with 30 to 45 minute queues for a Mythic Plus key. These changes alone give us hope for Season 2, and Floodgate has been the best dungeon we managed to test in only the first week, when 5 months of beta testing for the expansion yielded us with way worse sessions. And now we get to this week's PTR. If you are watching this video, chances are you might have seen other videos or streams of people playing these dungeons, or even caught us live doing it as well. Man, oh man, are we ever in doubt about what the hell is going on with these dungeons. Rank 1 players attempting a +10, getting to the second boss of Rookery with no time left and 60 deaths on the counter, is really smashing that X'd out button right about now. We played these dungeons on the War Within beta on Mythic difficulty when they were available, and again recently as a +10, where we normally clear 11s and 12s, and we could barely get to the first boss. Bugs, one-shots, and healers having to hold their breaths to make sure not one wrong cast is going out or the entire party is dead hardly exemplifies the earlier design announcement that we were all excited for. It's probably fake. The PTR build we are playing has been delayed for 2 days this week, during which time Plunderstorm also launched to a rough start. Maybe the servers had issues, maybe patching was problematic, maybe Plunderstorm made it harder to get the PTR build up, which is confusing as to how one is connected to the other. Whatever the case, after 2 days of announced testing being postponed, one would expect we would get to sink our teeth into all the juicy announcements they had for us. Well, clearly that didn't happen, and what's even more disappointing is that likely this PTR version is older than what they are working on at the moment, older than the announced changes they had for the tank busters and casts, considering I died in Priory in 0.3 seconds from taking 16 million damage in spell casts. This is not what we were told. Either the changes they have announced haven't been implemented, or they have, and this is their take on slowing down the combat for more coordination and tanks need to die less to spike damage. Whichever the case, considering PTR testers are unpaid QA employees that test stuff out of their own goodwill and free time, with the exception of content creators of course, this whole situation we have right now seems in very poor taste and generally very disrespectful to the time of the players now stuck in a whole week with a broken PTR, unable to properly test and feedback to make sure the game we like and the devs apparently want to make is going to be fun. Or maybe we just need to get good. But as a Romanian saying goes, hope dies last, and there is hope. The marksmanship rework being one, which you can check in our video here. The changes to the spec, how it plays, with its procs, the synergies and burst damage, has been some of the most fun I have had on the PTR.